All right, let's dive into a story that is just so wild, so audacious, it almost sounds like a myth. We're talking about the guy who actually literally sold the Eiffel Tower.
And yeah, you heard that right. He didn't just pull this off once. He had the nerve to go back to Paris just a few months later and try to sell it again. So the big question here isn't did this happen, it's how in the world did he get away with it?
Okay, so to really get how a con this huge could even be possible, you have to start with the man behind it all. And Victor Lustig, well, he was no ordinary crook, not even close. He was a different breed of criminal altogether. His real name was Robert V. Miller, born in what was then Austria-Hungary. And this guy was brilliant, spoke multiple languages without a hitch. He basically just erased his old life and took on all these different identities. His go-to persona, though? Count Victor Lustig. Now, this Count title wasn't just some silly affectation, it was a weapon. Think about it, in post-World War I Europe, a title like that, it just opened doors. It made people instantly let their guard down.
And that's because Lustig was the textbook definition of a confidence man. I mean, the name says it all, right? His entire game wasn't about violence or threats. It was all about earning your confidence, getting you to trust him so much that you'd practically beg him to take your money.
Get this, Lustig actually had his own 10 commandments for con artists. And when you read them, it's like a masterclass in psychological warfare. Stuff like, be a patient listener, never look bored, and my favorite, wait for the other person to reveal their political opinions, then agree with them. See, this wasn't about cracking safes. It was about cracking people. He was a true predator who would listen to you, mirror you, and make you feel like the most important person in the room.
But here's the thing. Even a mastermind like Lustig needed the perfect storm to pull something like this off. And believe it or not, in 1925, Paris was the perfect place for his biggest show.
It's hard for us to imagine now, right? We see the Eiffel Tower as this timeless, beloved icon. But back then, not so much. You have to remember, it was built to be a temporary thing for the 1889 World's Fair. By the 1920s, it was just this giant, rusting hunk of metal that was costing the cash-strapped government a fortune to maintain. Seriously, the word on the street, the gossip you'd hear in cafes, was that they were probably just going to tear the whole thing down.
And that right there is the soil where Lustig planted his seed of a lie. It's what made him so brilliant. He didn't just make up some crazy story out of thin air. No, he listened to the whispers. He read the papers, and he took this very real, very plausible public rumor and just inserted himself into it as the secret official solution.
So you've got the man, you've got the moment, everything's perfectly aligned. Let's walk through exactly how he pulled off this legendary con, step by step.
Okay, so first, the setup. It was just flawless. He gets these fake but totally convincing government letters made. He sends them out to the 6 biggest scrap metal dealers in the city. And the meeting spot? He books a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most prestigious hotels in Paris, a place where the government actually held confidential meetings. He was borrowing its credibility. And it's there he zeroes in on his perfect target, a guy named André Poisson. Poisson was successful, sure, but he was also a bit insecure, craving a spot in the big leagues. The money was nice, but the idea of being in on a secret government deal, that was everything to him.
So Poisson is on the hook, but he's not totally landed yet. Something feels a little off, maybe a little too good to be true. And this, right here, is the moment Lustig proves he's a genius. He senses the hesitation. But instead of pushing his case harder, he does something completely unexpected. He pivots. In a one-on-one meeting, Lustig pulls off his masterstroke. He sort of leans in, confesses to Poisson that, as a government official, his salary isn't that great, and he implies he needs a little something extra to make the deal go smoothly, a bribe. Now think about this from Poisson's perspective. He's a businessman, probably a bit cynical, a perfectly honest official selling a national monument in secret? That seems weird, but a slightly corrupt official looking for a kickback? That he understood. That felt totally 100% real. The bribe wasn't a red flag, it was the final piece that made the whole picture believable.
And just like that, Poisson was sold. He handed over a certified check for the 7,000 tons of scrap, plus a huge pile of cash for the bribe. We're talking a sum that would be millions of dollars today. Lustig calmly takes the money, hands over a fake bill of sale, and is on the first train to Vienna with a suitcase full of cash, probably before Poisson had even finished his coffee.
So the con is done. He's got the money. You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Nope. What happens next is what really turns Victor Lustig into a legend.
Lustig gets to Vienna, and he's checking the Parisian papers every single day, just waiting for the headlines to scream about the fraud of the century. But nothing.
Not a word, just silence. So what does this absolute madman do? He goes back to Paris a few months later and tries to pull the exact same scam on a whole new group of scrap dealers. I mean, the sheer nerve is just off the charts. This time, though, his luck ran out. One of the dealers got suspicious, called the cops, and Lustig had to book it to the U.S.
So why the silence? Why didn't Poisson just call the police the moment he realized he'd been had? Well, can you imagine the humiliation, admitting to the world that you were the guy who tried to buy the Eiffel Tower? It would have destroyed his reputation, his business, everything. And that shame was Lustig's ultimate insurance policy. It's something con artists still rely on today. The fact that victims are often too embarrassed to ever report the crime.
And you'd think maybe he'd lay low in America, but no. Lustig just changed his game. He moved from these giant, one-time scores to smaller, repeatable cons. He had this famous one called the Romanian money box, which is basically a machine he claimed could print money. But even that got old. He eventually moved on to his biggest challenge yet, large-scale counterfeiting. And he was so good at it, his fake $100 bills were considered the best in the business. The Secret Service even gave them a nickname, Lustig Money.
So after all that, after dodging authorities on 2 continents, what finally brought him down? It wasn't some brilliant detective work. It was a classic tale, a woman scorned. His mistress found out he was cheating and turned him in. But even then, the story isn't over. While awaiting trial, he escapes from federal prison, I'm not kidding, using a rope made of bedsheets and just strolls out the front door pretending to be a window washer. They caught him again a month later, but still, what an exit.
Lustig finally ended up in Alcatraz, where he died in 1947. But his legend and the lessons his cons teach us about the art of deception, well, those are still very much alive.
And for the final, perfect, ironic twist to this whole story. After a lifetime of playing these larger-than-life characters, Count, top government official, you know what his death certificate listed as his occupation? Apprentice salesman. You can't make this stuff up. What an absurdly perfect, quiet end for the guy who sold the world's most famous landmark.
And that's why this isn't just some quirky old-timey crime story. It's incredibly relevant. His playbook, creating a sense of authority, finding and exploiting someone's insecurity, building trust before you strike, it's the exact same blueprint used for the sophisticated phishing scams and social engineering attacks that fill our inboxes today.
You know, Lustig had his own twisted justification for it all. He famously claimed that you can't con an honest man. He believed he was only ever taking from people whose own greed and desire for a shortcut made them easy targets. It's a deeply cynical way to see the world, but it was absolutely key to how he operated.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. Lustig's entire career was built on finding that little bit of larceny in his victim's heart, that desire to get a special deal, an inside track. So was he the one creating that greed, or was he just a master at finding it and reflecting it back at them? It's something to chew on.